The bullet grazed Kestrel, slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that trembled slightly, then kissed her with all the tenderness of a man who'd found his home in another person's heart. When they broke apart, both were laughing through tears. They hadn't expected to shed. "Mrs. Maddox," he said, testing the sound of it. "I like the way that sounds." Serafina held up her hand to watch the emerald catch the light. "Though I suppose we should make it official before Margaret starts planning a wedding that rivals the governor's inauguration." "About that. ... Kestrel grinned sheepishly. She may have already ordered flowers and a cake, and possibly hired half the musicians in Colorado. When? Saturday, if you're agreeable." Serafina threw back her head and laughed a free, joyful sound that had first captured Kestrel's heart in the auction gallery. 3 days' notice for my own wedding? What kind of outlaw did I fall in love with? It's the kind who knows a good thing when he sees it and doesn't want to give you time to change your mind. Never. She moved to the piano and began playing their melody again, the notes ringing clear and true in the morning air. "This is our song, Kestrel Maddox. Started with a whistle and an answer, and it's going to last forever." He pulled out his harmonica and joined her, their music twining together as naturally as breath. Outside, Denver continued its bustling morning routine. But inside the music hall, two hearts beat in perfect rhythm with a melody that had brought them together across impossible odds. When the last note faded, Serafina looked at her future husband and smiled. "Play it again," she said, and he did, hat brim as he dove behind the water trough, his whistled tune of Red River Valley cut short by the crack of Winchester fire. Dust clouds erupted around him as boots thundered past the auction house steps where he'd been standing moments before, admiring the spirited filly being led to the bidding block. "You got some nerve showing your face here, Kestrel Maddox." "Shh, Sheriff." Bronson's voice boomed across Willowbrook's main square, his gun drawn and aimed. "That's stolen cattle money burning a hole in your pocket." Kestrel's lips curved into a grin as he pressed his back against the wooden trough. The accusation was false. Every dollar in his worn leather pouch had been earned breaking wild mustangs. 4 ranchers across 3 counties. But explaining that to Bronson would require more time than the angry mob gathering behind the sheriff was likely to give him. That's when he heard a clear, sweet voice rising from the auction gallery's second-floor balcony, picking up exactly where his whistle had left off. The melody floated down like honey, each note perfectly pitched, transforming his simple tune into something magical that made even the armed men pause. Kestrel lifted his eyes to see her, auburn hair catching the afternoon sun, emerald eyes focused, not on the chaos below, but on some distant point beyond the mountains. She wore a simple blue dress that spoke of modest means, but her voice held the power to stop time itself. As she sang, her fingers absently traced patterns on the galleries wooden railing, and Kestrel realized she was playing piano keys that existed only in her mind. "Serafina, get away from that window." An older woman's voice cracked like a whip from somewhere behind the singer. The girl Serafina didn't flinch. Instead, she lifted her chin higher and sang louder, her voice now carrying a note of defiance. That made Kestrel's heart skip. She was singing for him, he realized. A complete stranger had chosen to shield him with nothing but melody and courage. Sheriff Bronson's gun wavered as the townspeople found themselves caught in the spell of her voice. Even the nervous filly at the auction block had stilled ears, pricked forward as if listening. "Damn it, Serafina," Bronson hollered, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "This ain't the time for your singing." Kestrel used the distraction to his advantage, rolling beneath the auction platform where shadows offered better cover. From this angle, he could see Seraphine's feet positioned at the balcony's edge, her worn leather boots keeping perfect time with her song. Those weren't the shoes of a town princess. They belonged to someone who knew hard work. "She's covering for him." Someone in the crowd shouted, "The girl's in cahoots with the outlaw." The music stopped abruptly. Seraphine's boots shifted, and Kestrel heard her sharp intake of breath. In the sudden silence, he could hear his own heartbeat and the distant lowing of cattle. The moment stretched taut as a bowstring, pregnant with possibility and danger. "Miss Serafina ain't never spoken to a stranger in her life," came a weathered voice from the crowd. "She just loves her music is all." But Kestrel knew better. The way she'd picked up his melody, The way she'd sung with such intention, this was no coincidence. Somehow, impossibly, this auburn-haired angel had chosen to save him. He didn't even know why. The sound of approaching hoofbeats from the east end of town sent fresh tension through the square. Reinforcements were coming, and Kestrel's window of opportunity was closing fast. Seraphine's hands trembled as she gripped the balcony railing, watching the stranger below duck deeper into the shadows beneath the auction platform. Her heart hammered against her ribs, not from fear, but from something else entirely. Something that had sparked to life the moment she'd heard his whistle drift up from the street. Seraphina Cordelia Hartwell, you get yourself away from that window this instant. Her Aunt Cordelia's voice cut through the tension like a blade, but Seraphina couldn't move. 23 years of obedience, of sitting properly and speaking only when spoken to, of hiding her music because it wasn't ladylike. Too performal of it crumbled as she stared down at the cowboy, who'd brought melody to her otherwise silent world. The approaching riders thundered into the square, kicking up clouds of dust that made the crowd scatter. Seraphina counted 6 men, all wearing deputy badges and carrying enough firepower to level the entire auction house. The stranger, she'd heard them call him Kestrel, was trapped with nowhere to run. There's no way out of this one, Maddox. Sheriff Bronson called out, emboldened by his reinforcements. Come out peaceful, and we'll make sure you get a fair trial. Seraphina saw Kestrel's shoulders shake with silent laughter. Even facing impossible odds, he found humor in the situation. The sight sent warmth flooding through her chest. Sheriff Kestrel's voice carried easily across the square, smooth as aged whiskey. If I come out, will you at least let me thank the lady for her beautiful song? You'll keep your distance from decent folk. Then I reckon I'll stay put. Seraphina made her decision in that heartbeat. Without another thought for propriety or consequences, she gathered her blue skirts and ran for the stairs. Her aunt's shocked protests faded behind her as she burst through the auction house's side door into the alley that ran behind the building. The narrow space between buildings was cluttered with barrels and discarded lumber, providing perfect cover as she crept toward the main square. She could hear the deputies positioning themselves, their boots scraping against wooden walkways as they surrounded the auction platform. Pissed, the soft sound came from her right. Kestrel had somehow worked his way around to the back of the platform, his blue eyes bright with surprise and something that might have been admiration. You shouldn't be here, miss. Neither should you, apparently. She kept her voice to a whisper, crouching beside a stack of feed barrels. Up close, she could see he was younger than his reputation suggested, maybe 30 at most. With sun-weathered hands and a scar along his jaw that spoke of hard living. Why did you sing for me? His question was direct, without flowery politeness. Because Seraphina searched for words that wouldn't sound foolish. Because your whistle was the first music I'd heard in months that wasn't played in church or at some stuffy social function. It was ... free. Kestrel's expression softened. You play piano? It wasn't a question. He'd somehow seen her phantom fingering on the balcony rail. I did. My father sold our piano last spring to pay debts. Aunt Cordelia says music is a distraction from finding a proper husband, and what do you say? I say music is the only thing that makes me feel alive. The crack of a rifle shot made them both flinch. Sheriff Bronson was losing patience. Listen, Kestrel said urgently. There's a trail that runs behind Widow Mackenzie's boarding house. It follows the creek bed up into the foothills. If a person were to leave supplies, their food, water, maybe a fresh horse, you're asking me to help you escape. I'm asking you to choose what kind of life you want to live. Seraphina stared into his eyes, seeing wild open spaces and freedom beyond anything her small world had offered. The sound of boots on wooden steps meant the deputies were closing in. The old mining road, she whispered quickly, miles up the creek trail. There's an abandoned cabin where my father used to prospect. No one goes there anymore. Kestrel reached out and gently touched her hand. What's your name? Seraphina. He said it like a prayer. Will you meet me there? Tonight, before she could answer, shouts erupted from the main square. Someone had spotted movement near the platform. The crash of splintering wood echoed through Willowbrook as Sheriff Bronson's men overturned barrels and crates, searching every shadow near the auction platform. Seraphina pressed herself against the boarding house wall, her heart threatening to burst from her chest as she watched Kestrel melt into the maze of back alleys like smoke. "He's gone," Deputy Willis shouted, his voice sharp with frustration. "Vanished like a damn ghost. Search every building." Bronson's command cracked across the square. "Check the stables, the church, the general store, everywhere." Serafina forced herself to walk calmly around to the front of the auction house. Smoothing her skirts and adopting the expression of mild confusion she'd perfected over years of dealing with her aunt's scrutiny, when she climbed the steps to the gallery, Aunt Cordelia was waiting with fire in her pale eyes. "Where have you been?" The older woman's voice could have cut glass. "The necessary," Serafina replied simply, settling into her chair as if nothing had happened. All the excitement upset my stomach. Cordelia studied her niece's face with the intensity of a hawk examining prey. "Will not speak to me in that tone, young lady. And you will certainly not involve yourself in the affairs of common criminals." "I sang a song, Aunt. Nothing more." That song caused quite enough trouble. Cordelia's thin lips pressed into a severe line. "Perhaps it's time we discussed your future more seriously. Mr. Blackthorne has expressed renewed interest in your hand. A marriage would settle you nicely." Yes. Seraphine's blood turned to ice water. Cornelius Blackthorne owned the largest ranch in 3 counties and had been widowed twice under circumstances that set tongues wagging. He was also 57 years, old with hands that lingered too long and eyes that made her skin crawl. "I won't marry him. You will marry whomever I deem appropriate. Your father left you in my care, and I intend to see you properly settled before a commotion in the square," cut off Cordelia's lecture. The auction had resumed, but the crowd's attention kept drifting to the ongoing search. Deputies moved through the throng like hunting dogs, questioning anyone who might have seen which direction Kestrel had fled. "Miss Hartwell." Deputy Morrison approached their balcony seats, hat in hand but suspicion written across his weathered features. "Mind if I ask what you saw of the outlaw's escape?" "Nothing at all," Serafina replied smoothly. "I was quite shocked by the gunfire and spent most of the time with my eyes closed, praying for everyone's safety." Morrison's gaze lingered on her face. "That was a mighty convenient song you sang. Seemed to calm everyone down just when he needed a distraction." "Music has always been my response to chaos, Deputy. Surely you don't suspect me of planning criminal activities." Cordelia's sharp intake of breath was audible. "How dare you question my niece's character? The Hartwell name has been respectable in this town for 3 generations. Begging your pardon, Mrs. Hartwell. Just doing my duty." Morrison tipped his hat and moved on, but Serafina could feel his suspicion following her like a shadow. The afternoon dragged on with agonizing slowness. Adafina sat through the remainder of the auction, watching horses and cattle change hands while her mind raced with thoughts of creek beds and abandoned cabins. When Cordelia finally declared, "It's time to leave," the sun was already sinking toward the western hills. Their walk home took them past Widow Mackenzie's boarding house, where several of Bronson's men were still conducting their search. Serafina noted the position of the creek trail with studied casualness, filing away every detail of the terrain. "I expect you to remain in your room this evening," Cordelia announced as they reached the small house they shared on Elm Street. "No music, no reading by the window, and certainly no romantic notions about outlaws and adventure. Tomorrow we'll discuss your engagement to Mr. Blackthorne in earnest." Serafina nodded obediently, but her fingers were already tracing phantom piano keys against her skirt. As darkness settled over Willowbrook, she waited in her room until she heard Cordelia's snores drifting through the thin walls. Then she gathered her warmest cloak, filled a small bag with bread and dried meat from the kitchen, and slipped out into the star-filled night. The creek trail was easier to follow than she'd expected, silvered by moonlight and marked by the gentle sound of running water. Each step took her further from the life she'd known, and closer to something wild and uncertain. For the first time in years, Serafina felt truly alive. The abandoned mining cabin perched on a rocky outcrop like a weathered sentinel, its broken windows staring down at the moonlit valley below. Seraphine's breath came in white puffs as she climbed the last steep section of trail, her heart hammering from more than just exertion. What if Kestrel hadn't come? What if this was all some elaborate joke or worse, a trap? But as she crested the final rise, she saw the warm glow of lamplight spilling through the cabin's single intact window. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, and 2 horses stood tethered in what had once been the mine's equipment yard. One was a sturdy bay mare she didn't recognize. The other was her father's old gelding, Maestro, who she'd thought was sold months ago along with everything else of value. "I wasn't sure you'd come." Kestrel's voice emerged from the shadows beside the cabin door. He stepped into the moonlight, and Serafina saw he'd cleaned up since their encounter behind the auction house. His dark hair was combed back, and he'd traded his dusty trail clothes for a clean white shirt that made his eyes look impossibly blue. "I wasn't sure either," she admitted. Suddenly aware of how she must look windblown and flushed from the climb, her cloak caught on brambles. "Is that really Maestro?" "Found him at Hendrick's stable with a for sale sign. Figured a lady who plays phantom piano might appreciate getting her horse back." Kestrel's smile was soft in the lamplight. "Cost me most of what I had in my pocket, but something told me it was important." Serafina felt tears prick her eyes. Maestro had been her companion through childhood, the one who'd carried her on long rides when the walls of respectability closed in too tight. She'd cried for days when Aunt Cordelia announced his sale. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." "I know enough." Kestrel stepped closer, close enough that she could smell leather and wood smoke on his skin. "I know you chose to help a stranger when it would have been safer to stay silent. I know you're brave enough to climb a mountain trail in the dark. And I know the way you sang told me everything I needed to hear about who you are inside. The sheriff says you're a cattle thief. Sheriff Bronson says a lot of things. Most of them designed to make his life easier rather than uncover the truth." Kestrel's expression grew serious. "I won't lie to you, Serafina. I've done things that weren't strictly legal. But I've never stolen from honest folks trying to make an honest living." She studied his face in the moonlight, looking for deception and finding none. "Then why did they want you so badly?" "Because I know who really has been rustling cattle in this valley. And because that person has enough influence to make sure the blame falls on a convenient outsider." "Who?" Kestrel hesitated. "Your friend Mr. Blackthorne has been running quite an operation. Takes cattle from small ranchers, changes the brands, and sells them 3 counties over. Been doing it for 2 years now." Seraphine's stomach dropped. "Cornelius. But Aunt Cordelia wants me to marry him. I figured as much when I saw him watching you at the auction. Man like that always wants to own beautiful things." Kestrel's voice carried a note of anger. "That's another reason I had to get you away from town tonight. Once Blackthorne realizes I'm onto his game, anyone connected to me won't be safe." The implications hit her like a physical blow. By helping Kestrel escape, by meeting him here, she'd painted herself as an accomplice in the eyes of the law. There would be no going back to her quiet life with Aunt Cordelia, no matter what she decided tonight. "I can't go home," she said quietly. "No," Kestrel agreed. "Can't. But that doesn't mean you have to come with me. There are other choices, such as I have a sister in Denver, married to a good man who owns a music hall. They'd take you in, help you start fresh. You could play piano again, maybe even perform if you wanted." The offer was generous, almost too generous. Serafina looked up at this man who'd somehow turned her entire world upside down in the space of a single afternoon. "And what would you do? Head north? Find a place where nobody knows my name or my reputation. Start over without me. Without putting you in more danger than you're already in." Serafina walked to where Maestro stood, running her hands along his familiar neck as she tried to make sense of the chaos in her heart. Behind her, she could hear Kestrel moving around the cabin, probably packing supplies for whatever journey lay ahead. The sound that stopped her was unexpected. The clear, sweet notes of a harmonica picking up the melody she'd sung from the auction gallery. Kestrel had found the tune again. But this time it was different, richer, more complete. Without thinking, she began to hum along, then to sing softly. Their music twined together in the mountain air, creating something neither could have achieved. Alone, when the last note faded, Serafina turned to find Kestrel watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. "Play that again," she said. Dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of rose and gold as Serafina and Kestrel sat beside the dying fire, sharing coffee and hardtack, while Maestro and the bay mare grazed in the morning grass. They'd spent the night making music as harmonica weaving through her voice in ways that felt ancient and new all at once. Now, with daylight bringing the reality of decisions that couldn't be postponed, the easy magic between them felt fragile. A spun glass. The trail north follows the ridge for about 20 miles before dropping into Copper Canyon, Kestrel said, studying a hand-drawn map spread across his knees. From there, it's another 2 days to the territorial line. Serafina nodded, though her attention was caught by movement in the valley below. A line of riders was making its way up the creek trail to many riders, moving with too much purpose. To be anything but trouble? Kestrel. Her voice was tight with controlled fear. He followed her gaze and cursed softly. 8 men, maybe 9. He folded the map quickly and stood, already moving toward the horses. We need to go now. How did they find us, Blackthorn? Kestrel's voice was grim as he saddled the bay mare with practiced efficiency. Man knows every trail and hideout in these mountains. Probably figured out where you'd bring me. Seraphine's hands shook as she prepared Maestro's tack. The riders were closer now, close enough that she could see the gleam of rifle barrels in the morning sun. There's nowhere to run. The trail only goes up from here, and it dead ends at the old mine shaft. Then we make a stand. Against 9. Armed men? Seraphine's voice cracked. Kestrel, that's suicide. He stopped what he was doing and crossed to her, taking her face gently between his hands. Listen to me. There's a chance I can hold them long enough for you to get away. Take Maestro and ride hard for the North Ridge. Don't stop until you reach my sister in Denver. I won't leave you. You have to... This is my fight, not yours. It became my fight the moment I chose to help you. Serafina pulled free from his grip, her green eyes blazing with determination. Besides, you're forgetting something important. What? I know these mountains better than Blackthorn does. Yeah, my father prospected every canyon and creek bed for miles. There's another way out. Hope flickered in Kestrel's expression. Where? The mine shaft doesn't dead-end. Connects to a whole network of tunnels that come out near Widow's Peak, about 5 miles north. The passages are narrow and dangerous, but they'll get us out unseen. The sound of hoofbeats on stone grew. Louder? They had minutes, maybe less. Can you find your way through in the dark? I used to play in those tunnels as a child. Serafino's already moving toward the mine entrance, gathering rope and supplies. Papa always said I had a natural sense for underground spaces. Kestrel caught her hand as she passed, spinning her around to face him. Before she could speak, his lips found hers in a kiss that tasted of coffee and desperation and something deeper that had no name. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. Whatever happens in there, he said softly, I want you to know that last night making music with you was the best night of my life. It doesn't have to be the last. Shouts echoed from the trail below as the posse spotted the cabin. Serafina and Kestrel led the horses quickly into the mine entrance, where the darkness swallowed them like a living thing. The tunnels were exactly as Serafina remembered, narrow, winding passages carved from living rock, with side branches that disappeared into impenetrable blackness. This way, she whispered, taking the lead with a small lantern to light their path. Behind them, they could hear boots on the cabin's wooden steps, followed by Blackthorn's distinctive voice raised in anger. They were here. Horses are still warm. Check the mine shaft. Serafina urged Maestro deeper into the mountain, following. Passages that seemed to exist more in her childhood memory than in any logical pattern. The bay mare snorted nervously at the close confines, but Kestrel's steady murmur kept both animals calm. How much further? His voice echoed strangely in the enclosed space. 1/2 mile, maybe more. The main tunnel branches about 1/4 mile. Ahead, we take the left fork, then follow it until we see daylight. A gunshot cracked behind them, unnaturally loud in the stone corridors. Someone had found the mine entrance. They're following us, Kestrel said unnecessarily. Serafina quickened the pace, her lantern casting wild shadows on the tunnel walls. The left fork appeared exactly where her memory placed it, a narrow opening that would force them to lead the horses single file. Almost there, she breathed, though her heart was hammering so hard she could barely think. Behind them, voices and lamplight grew steadily closer. Then, like a miracle, she saw at a distant gleam of natural light marking the tunnel's end. They emerged onto a rocky ledge overlooking a valley she'd never seen before. With mountains stretching endlessly to the north, we made it. Kestrel's voice held wonder and relief in equal measure, but Serafina was looking back at the tunnel entrance, where the sound of pursuit had grown ominously quiet. They stopped following us, she said. Why would they? The explosion, when it came, shook the entire mountain. Rock, dust, and debris rained down as the mine entrance collapsed behind them in a thunderous roar of falling stone. Seraphine's ears rang as she fought to control Maestro, who danced sideways on the narrow ledge, his eyes rolling white with terror. Through the settling dust, she could see that what had been their escape route was now a solid wall of rubble. Blew the tunnel, Kestrel said grimly, steadying his own mount. Blackthorn's making sure we don't come back to tell anyone what we know about his cattle operation. But that means... Seraphine's voice trailed off as the full implications hit her. Anyone who is still in there is dead. Yeah, Kestrel's expression was stone-hard. That's the kind of man your aunt wanted you to marry. They sat in silence, for a moment, listening to the mountains settle around the destruction. Then Kestrel dismounted and began checking his saddlebags. We need to keep moving. Blackthorn knows these trails he'll have men circling around to cut us off before we can reach the territorial line. Serafina looked out over the unfamiliar valley spread below them. Dense forests covered the slopes, broken by silver streams and meadows that seemed to stretch forever. It was beautiful and utterly wild, without a single sign of human habitation. Where are we? North of anywhere I've been before? Kestrel consulted his compass and the hand-drawn map. But if we keep heading northwest, we should hit the main wagon road to Denver in 2, maybe 3 days, if we don't get lost, or starve, or run into bears. Serafina dismounted as well, her legs unsteady from the morning's events. I'm sorry. I know this isn't what you planned when you asked me to meet you. Kestrel looked up from his map, his blue eyes serious. Serafina, what I planned was to thank you for your help and then disappear from your life forever. What happened instead is that I found something I didn't even know I was looking for. What's that? A partner. Someone who's brave enough to follow a stranger into a mountain, smart enough to find a way out of an impossible situation. And he stepped closer, close enough that she could see flecks of gold in his eyes. And someone whose voice makes me want to be a better man then. I've been... Heat rose in Seraphine's cheeks. You barely know me. I know you gave up everything to help someone you'd never met. I know you'd rather face the wilderness than marry a man you don't love. And I know that when we make music together, it feels like coming home. Before she could respond, the distant sound of hoofbeats drifted up from the valley below. They both turned to see riders emerging from the forest, a dozen men spread out in a search pattern, moving systematically toward their position. Persistent. Bastard, Kestrel muttered. He must have sent riders around both sides of the mountain. Serafina mounted Maestro quickly, her mind racing. The ledge they stood on was exposed, visible from miles away. The forest below offered cover, but reaching it would mean descending a steep, treacherous slope that could easily lame a horse. There she pointed to a game trail that switched back down the mountainside. It's narrow, but it's our only chance. They began the descent carefully, letting the horses pick their way over loose stone and around fallen logs. Behind them, shouts indicated that their pursuers had spotted their movement. They're gaining on us, Kestrel called softly. Serafina looked back to see riders at the top of the trail, some dismounting to follow on foot, while others sought alternative routes down. The mathematics of pursuit were simple and grim. They had maybe a 20-minute head start against men who knew the country better than they did. That's when she heard the sound of rushing water somewhere ahead. The game trail seemed to be leading toward it, winding through increasingly dense forest. There's a river, she called to Kestrel. If we can reach it, rivers can be crossed. By us and by them. Not this one. Seraphine's voice held a note of excitement. Listen to? That's white water, probably rapids or a waterfall. If we can get across upstream from wherever it gets dangerous, we might be able to stop them from following. The trail opened into a clearing beside a roaring mountain river. The water ran swift and deep, fed by snowmelt and spring rains. Upstream, it looked manageable for strong swimmers and steady horses. Downstream, it disappeared around a bend with a sound that promised violence. Kestrel studied the crossing, his jaw tight with concentration. Water's cold and fast. If we get swept downstream,
Then
we take that chance together. Serafina guided Maestro toward the water's edge, unless you have a better idea. He looked at Hurley. He looked at her hand. Something shifted in his expression. The careful distance he'd maintained since they'd met was replaced by something deeper and more certain. Together, he agreed and urged his mare into the rushing current. The water was shockingly cold and powerful, enough to knock them sideways as the horses fought to maintain footing on the rocky bottom. Halfway across, Serafina felt Maestro stumble, and for a terrifying moment they were both underwater, the current trying to tear them apart. Then strong hands grabbed her bridle. Kestrel was pulling them toward the far bank with his free hand, while his mare struggled against the flow. They emerged, dripping and gasping, but alive and across. Behind them, their pursuers had reached the clearing. Serafina could see Blackthorn himself among them, his face twisted with rage as he realized the river had stopped his chase. "This isn't over?" His voice carried clearly across the water. "I'll see you both hang for what you've done." Kestrel's response was to pull out his harmonica and play a few mocking notes of Red River Valley. 3 months later, the morning sun slanted through tall windows into the music hall, where Serafina sat at a gleaming piano, her fingers dancing across keys that sang with perfect clarity. The melody she played knew something that had come to her in dreams of mountain trails and rushing water, of a man with blue eyes and a harmonica who'd taught her that freedom was worth any price. "That's beautiful, Sira." Kestrel's voice came from the doorway, where he stood with 2 cups of coffee, his hair still mussed from sleep. The formal clothes he wore, now clean shirt, pressed trousers, polished boots, couldn't quite hide the wildness that drew her like a magnet. "It's our song," she said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "The one we started that day at the auction house. Speaking of which, Kestrel pulled a folded newspaper from his jacket pocket. This came on. Yesterday's stage. The headline made Seraphine's breath catch. "Rancher arrested for cattle rustling." The article detailed Cornelius Blackthorn's downfall, how evidence of his crimes had mysteriously appeared on Sheriff Bronson's desk, leading to raids that uncovered altered brands and stolen stock. The final paragraph mentioned that Blackthorn had implicated several associates before disappearing from the county jail under suspicious circumstances. "He's gone." Serafina looked up at Kestrel, hardly daring to believe it. "According to my sources, he crossed the border into Mexico 2 weeks ago. Seems someone convinced him that staying in Colorado wouldn't be healthy." Kestrel's smile had a sharp edge. Amazing what a man will do when presented with the right motivation. Serafina didn't ask what kind of motivation. Some questions were better left unposed. "Does this mean we can go home? Do you want to?" Kestrel set down his coffee and moved to stand behind her at the piano. His hands came to rest on her shoulders, warm and steady. "Your Aunt Cordelia has been writing letters to every authority she can think of, demanding your return. Sheriff Bronson cleared my name officially, but there are still folks who'd rather see you safely married to a respectable man than running wild with a former outlaw." Serafina leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat through his shirt. The past 3 months had been the happiest of her life. Kestrel's sister Margaret had welcomed them both with open arms, and the music hall had become their sanctuary. Serafina performed 3 nights a week to audiences who appreciated her talent, while Kestrel had discovered an unexpected gift for managing the business side of entertainment. "I have everything I want right here," she said finally. "Music, freedom, and you. In that order." She turned on the piano bench to face him, her green eyes sparkling with mischief. "Well, the music comes first, obviously. A girl has to have priorities." Kestrel laughed and pulled her to her feet, spinning her around the empty dance floor as morning light painted everything gold. When he set her down, his expression had grown serious. "Serafina Hartwell, I've been carrying something around for weeks, waiting for the right moment." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold ring set with a small emerald that matched her eyes. "I know I can't offer you the kind of life your aunt had planned, no mansion. It's no social standing, No guarantees of anything except that every day will be an adventure. Kestrel. But I can promise you music every morning and dancing every night. I can promise you mountains and rivers and skies so wide they make you dizzy. And I can promise you that if you'll have me, I'll spend every day trying to deserve the gift of your voice singing our song. Serafina looked at the ring, then at the man offering it, then at the sun-drenched music hall that had become their world. In the distance, she could hear the sounds of Denver waking up horses and wagons, shopkeepers opening their doors, children playing in the streets. It was a different kind of music than the wind and mountain pines, but it was theirs. She said simply, "Kest."